Well, let's take a closer look now at universal basic income with Matt Darling. He's the Vice President of Ideas 42, a behavioral economics research and development lab. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
So give us an understanding, ultimately, what is the goal of a universal basic income?
I think there's a lot of goals with it, but I think the main one that occurs to me is that really it can eliminate extreme poverty. So just the guarantee that people who otherwise might not have any cash income, any money coming to them, would be necessarily have some money coming into them, and really eliminating people who are just in the worst possible scenarios.
So now that we have the results in from what happened in Finland, what lessons can others interested in UBI not just learn from Finland, but also what it means in terms of work, since the people didn't actually end up looking for work in the country as they'd hoped?
Yeah, I think one of the things to remember about the Finland study is that it's comparing the universal basic income to something more like unemployment insurance. So people who were in the control group were actually receiving money, but it was conditional on not finding a job. So you continue to get money as soon as you find a job. As soon as you start working part-time, you start getting less. And so what they were hoping is that just providing universal basic income would make it that people were more incentivized to start going and finding a job directly without worrying about that possibly losing it. So I think it's very hard for us to think about what the implications are to something within the United States or within China or any other country about just giving money universally, except in that sort of specific context of thinking about how do we think about unemployment insurance.
And obviously, as with the introduction of any sort of new social program, the issue of funding comes up. So what are the best funding options for this?
That's a great question, and I think a lot of it depends on how big the universal basic income is. For example, I think a lot of people talk about, if you really mean basic, being able to sort of maintain subsistence living in the United States, that's probably about $12,000 a year. And that's really hard to actually afford. That's about $4 trillion, the current total federal spending. There's other options that have been looked at. So a lot of economists recently signed a petition. I think it's maybe 3,000 economists saying we should do a carbon tax and have that pay for a basic income. And that'd be a lot smaller, it'd be about $2,000 per person, but that might be a good start.
Now, we saw that India's main opposition party is promising to roll out universal basic income if it wins the country's upcoming election. Why do you think this issue continues to generate so much global interest?
I think, globally, a lot of issues are happening with how labor markets work. A lot of the points that you raised earlier about how automation works, and there's just a lot of people worried about losing jobs, about having to retrain or reskill or move all across the country to another country. And so people are trying to think about how can we make the welfare system work better? How can it be something that really, you don't need to worry about lots of different conditions, lots of different work requirements, but something that you can kind of rely on no matter what. And a basic income really succeeds at that.
So how far do you think UBI and some of these other welfare programs are going to go to addressing some of those concerns over job losses from automation?
I think basic income, because it has that universal factor of it, it can be a lot more effective in those sorts of conditions. So you think about, with automation, in the United States, a lot of welfare systems are tied to having a job, right? So things like Medicaid or food stamps, a lot of times, depending on which state you live in, you have to have a job to receive the money. And that can be really tricky for people if unemployment is high and you can't find a job, or if just there's a lot of bureaucratic requirements where you have to actually demonstrate that you're employed week to week or month to month, sometimes with non-functioning websites and things like that. And so I think that's the idea of the basic income, is that if there is a lot of disruption due to automation, if there's a lot of troubles that people are running into, that it's something that's going to be reliable and you don't necessarily need to worry about the other issues.
And what do you see as the biggest hurdles to implementing UBI, especially since there are some alternatives when it comes to addressing poverty and the wage disparity?
Yeah, I think the financing issue we talked about earlier, I think that's the big one. Just finding the money to do that. And you think about the mathematics of it is that for providing this a given amount to everybody, you could provide twice that amount to half of people. And so there's a lot of trickiness in terms of figuring out how universal should a program be. But I think, universal basic income is something that we should be thinking about as an option, and that we don't have to have a welfare system that's just one thing for everybody, but a universal basic income is something that really, isn't out there right now and can work together with other programs like unemployment insurance, like the minimum wage, like the earned income tax credit, and a lot of other programs that people are considering right now, like a job guarantee.
Matt Darling there, Vice President at Ideas 42. Thanks for joining us.